announcements. Now, to get you oriented, we'll be using two different maps here, but if you'd like to start off with your first one, the top of it should be generally off in that direction. That way is north. Most of you are facing predominantly to the east. And if you can find near the middle of the map a little block for McCool. The McCool house is further down in that direction, just beyond where you see the portable restrooms in the parking area. And we are back in the vicinity where you can see some troops labeled as Johnston. Johnston himself would be on this map behind some earthworks. And you can't see them real well from here, but if you look in that direction, you can see that there is a little berm that has some small vegetation growing on it. That is this reserve line, as labeled on the map, running right across the base of the Mule Shoe salient. Also, off in that direction, here's the Harrison house and the Harrison field. We'll try to make a little reference to that a little bit later on and its significance in the day's fighting. All right, is everybody kind of oriented? Okay, good. What I'd like to do here is first off begin with tracing Robert E. Lee and what he has been doing on this day 150 years ago, leading up to when he's going to arrive in the very area where we're standing. Back at the Harrison house, off to the south of us, Lee would have had his headquarters established there, and he got up at around 3 o'clock or so in the morning, as had become his custom during this campaign. As he went to ride his lines, one of the first things that met him were some fugitives fleeing back from Edward Allegheny Johnson's division. And at this point, Robert E. Lee does not know what has happened yet on this morning. So as he meets these troops that are fleeing back, some of them panic-stricken, he took his hat off, and it's very interesting that we find many accounts that say Lee took his hat off. If ever he wanted to make sure that somebody knew who he was, he felt that by taking his hat off, he'd be more readily recognizable. Just sometime as you read about Robert E. Lee, note how many times it says he took his hat off. And he said, "Hold on, we're going to form a new line. Your comrades need your services. Stop, men." And it said that some of the men stopped, but that most of them were panic-stricken and kept on going past Robert E. Lee, something that he, of course, is not used to seeing. And he then yelled to the panic-stricken forces, "Shame on you, men! Shame on you! Go back to your regiments! Go back to your regiments!" Again, part of the reason why I think Robert E. Lee is shouting, "Shame on you," he does not know the reason why these troops have left. Now, I don't know if he would have said the same thing if he had awareness of it, but I do suggest to you that maybe this is a hint that he is not aware that some 20,000 men have overwhelmed the 6,000 men and just how difficult the situation was up ahead. He would soon learn, however. Riding back on an artillery horse was a staff officer of Edward Allegheny Johnson's command. His name is Robert W. Hunter. And when Hunter reached Lee, he said, "General, the line is broken at the angle in General Johnson's front." And it said that you could tell from the expression on Lee's face that his countenance had changed. He was very shocked and surprised, and now he knows from, again, somebody of authority that Johnson's men have been overwhelmed. Knowing that he had a reserve division back here under the command of John B. Gordon, Lee turns to Hunter and said, "Ride with me over to General Gordon's division." Now, the only troops that General Gordon had literally in reserve back here was Johnston's division, that's S-T rather than Johnson. Whenever we say Johnson, that's Edward Allegheny Johnson, the division commander up here. Johnston is Robert E. Johnston, the North Carolina Brigade commander, who is at the moment right behind those earthworks next to us. The rest of Gordon's division, as we touched on before, at my first stop, we were at Hoffman, Virginia. brigade, which was down there, and at your last stop you heard about some of the Georgians of Gordon's old brigade. Those are the 3 brigades making up the division. They are all scattered, but Lee is riding back to this particular area, and Gordon has already acted. Gordon has gotten various nebulous reports that morning coming in, which he said none of them in and of themselves hinted of the disaster up front, but if you add them all together, he was fearful that something had gone terribly wrong. And eventually some bullets apparently even start flying out of the woods in this direction. Gordon took his 1 brigade that he had here, the North Carolinians under R.D. Johnston, apparently grasping that there was a massive federal force out in this direction that's working its way down the east face of the Mule Shoe salient, that he needs a broad front to try to deal with it. He also knows that the brigade size is probably not going to be enough, but what's one of the atmospheric factors of this particular morning? Fog. And fog helps to do what? But obscure and camouflage. So Gordon thinks that if I put these men out in a solid skirmish line, they might be able to cover the whole front of Hancock's command breaking through, and because of the cover of the fog, if his men yell and fire enough, it might deceive the Federals into thinking it's a larger force and might bring them to a halt and buy him some time to bring back the rest of his troops, Evans and Pegram Hoffman's Virginia Brigade, to come back and get a more formidable body of men to go after the Federals. So that was his plan, and he sends R.D. Johnston into the woods. Johnston would end up being wounded in this particular action, taking a wound to the head that fortunately would not prove to be mortal for him. So, this is the situation when Robert E. Lee, with Hunter, arrives somewhere back in this vicinity. They run across General Gordon, and he explains to Robert E. Lee the dispositions that he has made in sending Johnson ahead and pulling back his other troops. His other troops are probably around here. If you'd like to switch to the next map, that is one that is labeled May 12th, 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. And if you find McCool House, we are to the south of that, or more toward the bottom of the map. You can see an arrow showing that Johnston leaving our vicinity, heading off to what is your front and a little bit to your left. And now let's deal with the other units of Gordon's command, Hoffman's Virginians and Evans's Georgians. They, at about this time now, have gathered up here, and you can see that the Virginians are to the left and the Georgians are to the right. This is a scene that Robert E. Lee would come upon, and now we'll pick up our story with the same man that I was quoting before, that Colonel Catlett, what is his last name? His first name is Catlett. Gibson, thank you. Catlett Gibson of the 49th Virginia picks up by explaining what happens. He sees General Lee approach his command and rides up and salutes him, expecting Lee to give him orders, and Lee paid no attention to him, just rode right on by. He rode in a gap that was between the Virginia Brigade and the Georgia Brigade and rode on up to the front. Now, before I explain a little what happens next, a little background of something that happened to John D. Gordon as he was involved with sending Johnston's men into these woods in front of us. There was a point when bullets were flying by, and Gordon noticed that this one particular staff officer, his name was Thomas Jones, was kind of hunched over on his horse, while Gordon, always sitting erect, standing erect. It's often noted as one of the kind of posture and the air of confidence that General Gordon always kind of exuded. So Gordon is sitting upright on his horse, and a bullet flies behind him that he said actually clipped a little bit of his back. And the staff officer Jones says, "General Gordon, didn't that bullet hit you?" And he says, "No, but suppose my back had been in a bow like yours." He said, "Don't you see that bullet would have killed me?" He says, "Sit up or you'll be killed." So, Gordon is teasing or dressing down this one staff officer a little bit. And now let's get back to where I left off before with General Lee riding on up to the front. And everybody again in the Army had heard of the Lee to the Rear Texas episodes. I'm not sure if anybody had heard in the Army that Lee had an episode again or two on the evening of May 10th, as we discussed. But everybody has heard in the Army of the Lee to the Rear episode with the Texas Brigade and were aware of what was going on, including John B. Gordon. And Gordon will ride up to Traveler, will go, and it says he took a hold of the bridle at Traveler's right cheek. So, again, you're probably somewhat oriented the way this would have been, and I don't know if we're at the exact spot, but I think we're really close to it. So again, imagine Lee going between these two brigades. Traveler's there, his right side of his head is here, so Gordon's on the other side, grabs a hold of the bridle, because he wants to utilize this as something to motivate his forces. And the man that I mentioned before, Colonel Gibson, says that while Gordon has grasped a hold, and we'll share with his words in a moment, but while he's talking to the men, that there is another staff officer on the other side who's grabbed a hold of the bridle and is tugging at it. He says it's almost comical that as Gordon is holding fast, there's a man on the other side tugging. And I often wondered, could this be Thomas Jones, the man that Gordon earlier in the day had criticized for not sitting up? Is he trying to maybe redeem himself in the eyes of General Gordon? We may never know, but I often found that interesting. We got two stories of staff officers, one dressed down and one obviously very anxious to be the one to take Robert E. Lee to the rear. So, while they're here, again, with Lee riding on up to the front, let me find my quote here. But the accounts that we have, one said of Robert E. Lee, not a word did he say, but simply took off his hat as he sat on his charger. I never saw a man look so noble or a spectacle so impressive. And one had to say the general's countenance showed that he had despaired and was ready to die rather than see the defeat of his army. Now, as we look at motivations of Robert E. Lee going to the front, as you might imagine, there are some that have indicated, as this last soldier, that this is an act of despair, that Robert E. Lee wants to pass, doesn't want to see his command defeated in this particular way. If you look at all the other kind of evidence around it, one of the reasons why I shared with you the story of the McCool house the night before and stressed the point that it was noted that Robert E. Lee was teasing the men as he's telling them this story from the Mexican War about seeing the sheep that he thought was 10. Lee is in a very good mood. He is also somebody that is very, very active. He had been up to this. He's active after that. He's putting in a lot of effort into this battle to try to make sure it succeeds. That is not the kind of person that I would think that wants to go into the action and have it and have him go out in somehow an honorable way. I don't think, of all the different motivations that Robert E. Lee may have for these Lee to the Rear episodes, this is the one that I think has the weakest amount of evidence. But throw that out there, share it with you what one of the men here had to say. Gordon, again, is holding on to the bridle, and here is what he says to Robert E. Lee. I'll share with you basically two different accounts. You can look at the similarities and the differences. But he said, "You must not expose yourself. Your life is too valuable to the Army and to the Confederacy for you to risk it so wantonly." Gordon went on to say, "We are Georgians. We are Virginians. We need no such encouragement." And to that, our Colonel Gibson says the men all chanted, "No," as if, no, we don't need to have some kind of special encouragement. Gordon then said, according to Colonel Gibson, "There's not a soldier in the Confederate Army that would not gladly lay down his life to save you from harm." And he wrote, when Gordon paused after that, there was no response from the men. we're getting into something serious now. One, to tell General Lee, no, we don't need him to motivate us and lead us into action, but we're talking about now the potential of every man potentially going down in this action. It is now getting serious. And then the comment from some of the men, come back, General Lee, we can't fight while you are in front. The men calling for General Lee again to go to the rear. Another account, to kind of start over a little bit with Lee already up at the front, said that General Gordon spotted Lee in front of the troops. And then that it said General J.B. Gordon came dashing down the line. And at the sight of Lee, he reined up his handsome bay so sharply as to throw him on his haunches. It was a picture gosh, I can't read today. It was a picture never to be forgotten. And Gordon recalled, General Lee, this is no place for you. Go back, General. We will drive them back. These men are Virginians, and they have never failed me. They will not fail me. Will you, boys? And with that, the men started to shout, General, Lee to the rear! Lee to the rear! Go back, General. We can't charge until you go back. We will drive them back, General. And noted that at that moment, Gordon lets loose of the bridle and allows someone else to lead Lee back to the rear. So with that, now these two brigades, the Georgia Brigade and Virginia Brigade that are here, more organized force and more traditional battle line, will go forward ahead, as your map kind of shows in those general arrows, heading off to try to hit the Federals on the east face. The program this afternoon will cover the end of their action. Here's where they kicked off. You'll learn in the other program just what Federals they became engaged in and about their fighting subsequent to this. So now, with Gordon's men all being utilized in the woods in front of you, Lee now turns once again to Hunter, that man, the staff officer from General Johnson's division, who's mounted on his artillery horse, and asked him to help try to gather up units of Johnson's old command and to send them to General Gordon. I find that interesting. He feels that Gordon obviously has a grasp of the situation, has an idea of what can be done, and just like Eric mentioned about Robert Rhodes as somebody that seems to be a rising star on this day, that people take note of and see that he is performing very well. Lee is obviously impressed what Gordon has done on this morning and wants reinforcements gathered. He doesn't say go gather up forces and send them to General Ewell. He says send them to General Gordon. What about General Ewell? Perhaps it's at this time as Lee continues to try to rally troops, or maybe it was earlier as part of his ride with Hunter, that he does find Ewell out here trying to rally folks. Ewell is cursing at his men, hitting them with his sword, telling them to run and hoping that the Yankees will catch up with them. Is that a way to rally troops? How many people do you think stopped when Richard Ewell swears at them and tries to hack them with a sword and hopes they get captured? General Lee will spot him and will ride up to him at one point and say, General Ewell, how do you expect to control your troops if you cannot first control yourself? And Ewell, if he was not on his way out as a Corps commander already by this point, this is the type of thing which Robert E. Lee, a man that's typically, again, very, very stoic, is somebody, is the type of thing that he does not permit. And talking about his stoicism, to make comparisons with other Lee to the Rear episodes, everybody notes that Robert E. Lee was very quiet in this whole Lee to the Rear episode. He rode up to the front and basically stayed there until the men again sent him to the rear. This was a situation where what was ahead of him, he knew it was bad, he knew it was a disaster. He's not excited, again, very, very calm, and allowed the men to move on forward in their attack. There's going to be another Lee to the Rear episode, probably in this same vicinity, sometime in the aftermath of what we just discussed, he will turn to, Robert E. Lee will turn to one of his staff members, Venable, and will